Welcome back to Mornings with Dave King and Matt Martin. We've got Scott Braddock on the line, and Scott, thanks for coming on.
Of course.
Glad to hear from you today because we got a lot to talk about.
Oh, we do. The announcement from the governor yesterday, a big deal for businesses around the state, although there are some businesses, as you know, that are very unhappy. You want to start there?
Yeah, I kind of do. The governor's saying that restaurants can open up to 75%. But on the other hand, Governor Abbott has said that bars still cannot open.
Yeah, tapping the brakes on the bars, and a lot of people pretty upset about it. Yesterday, the Texas Bar and Nightclub Alliance said that he was anti-business Abbott. As you said, some people are calling him King Abbott.
I used to call him Daddy Abbott, but people didn't like that very much.
Nicknames are piling up, and none of them are good. 75% for retail stores, restaurants, office buildings, manufacturing, museums, and libraries, all across most of Texas, with a few exceptions in the Victoria, Laredo, and Rio Grande Valley area. They're not allowed to lift these restrictions, and the governor said he's looking specifically at hospitalizations for COVID-19. He said if they're under a certain low percentage for 7 consecutive days, then that means that further reopenings are warranted, but at the same time, those bars have to remain closed. Yesterday at QuorumReport.com, we noted with some irony that the governor was saying that it's the social distancing problems at the bars, and that's why they can't open. He chose one of the smallest rooms in the Texas Capitol to make this announcement, with reporters and his own staff and others, the speaker and the lieutenant governor, all sort of packed in like sardines into this tiny little room, when, by the way, there's an auditorium in the same building that would seat about 300 people, and everybody could have been spaced out. I think that might have made his point a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, one of the things...
people were really asking the question, though, Matt, like, does he really care about the social distancing, or what is really going on there? And I think, there is some scientific data to back up the idea that there are certain settings, including some bars, but not all, because we also know that not all bars are alike. I mean, there are some places where people are really packed in, and other places where that's just not the case. But the fact of the matter is that people were asking that question, are you really serious about the social distancing or not?
But even from that aspect, you would think that the governor pretty easily could have set it up more like a restaurant and said, look, you can't get up. You can't do, as far as bars, it's not a club. You can't dance. You got to sit down at a table, and get served. I mean, there's certain things that a bar could do just as easily as a restaurant to follow the rules.
Yeah, they're making up a lot of this stuff as they go along, and that's been the case throughout the pandemic. And some of the stuff has gone over a little better with the public, and then some other things. As you know, in the last month or so, there was a determination made that certain bars would be able to be reclassified as restaurants, because in Texas, it all comes down to the sales of, legally it comes down to the sales of food versus alcohol. If you're over 50% in your alcohol sales, then that means that you're a bar. But some of these bars have been able to do things like, partner up with a food truck and, include those receipts in their totals and say that, well, that's actually a restaurant. And as the governor pointed out yesterday, if they're now operating as a, quote, restaurant, then they have to follow those rules that you talked about, Matt.
Well, and the other thing, I don't know, how it is in Lubbock yet. I haven't really heard, but I believe that in some cases you've got restaurants that the ordinance say that restaurants can't have smoking, but bars can, and in those circumstances they're having to become non-smoking restaurants.
Right. You do have the head of that Bar and Nightclub Alliance saying that it's at Abbott's hands alone that bar owners are having to basically figure out what they're going to do with their livelihoods. He said their livelihoods are being destroyed, they're losing everything, because they've always operated in a certain way, including some of the ways you're talking about, and some are not being given a chance to reopen, including changing some of the ways that they have done business. For some of them, they're just shut down, and I think as our friend Chad Hasty keeps tweeting over and over again about this issue, he says, where's the real conversation with the governor and those owners of those businesses? Is there any real plan for them going forward, or is it just that they need to continue to be on hold? This also puts
He says that there's a plan coming out, but I haven't seen anything.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything concrete. And I was going to say, it also puts a lot of Republican office holders and candidates in an interesting position of basically running against the governor's position on this stuff. I just saw yesterday where Chip Roy, who's a very conservative congressman from south of Austin, his district takes in parts of Austin and San Antonio, kind of runs in between the two cities. Chip Roy, who comes right out of the Ted Cruz School of Politics, very conservative, constitutional conservative, all that. He was tweeting out, that Texas needs to either have those businesses be open or make them whole if they're not going to be open, which, number one is running against the Republican governor in his own reelection effort there for Congressman Roy, but also making a statement that to some people sounds a little sort of socialist by saying the government ought to come in and, pay them a lot of money to be closed.
Yeah.
Weird situation.
Yeah, it is, and I'm hearing that from a lot of conservatives, so that's kind of surprising too. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up was apparently the mayor or one of the people that work for the mayor in Nashville is under some scrutiny after they came out with a letter. It's kind of going through social media, so I double checked, and it seems to be real that they were kind of trying to hide the numbers that were coming from bars. And I don't necessarily want to get in the weeds with that, but shouldn't the governor have to prove, what he's saying, that all these COVID-19, all of it was coming from the bars?
You would think that we would see some real numbers from the governor. Two of the things that Democrats pointed out yesterday that were not included in the governor's press conference that we just talked about. One, you remember that the state entered into a pretty controversial $295 million contact tracing contract.
Right.
A contact tracing contract. Say that 5 times fast.
Mm-hmm.
The state took that on, and there were all these questions about it. And there was further reporting, I believe, in the Houston Chronicle, where they had pointed out that as the cases were spiking, the folks who worked for the company that was supposed to be doing that contact tracing, that they weren't doing much work. They weren't really doing anything.
They were getting paid for doing nothing.
Getting paid quite a bit, about $300 million in your tax dollars. So people on right and left not happy about that. And the other thing that the governor didn't talk about is what's been widely reported is some of the data in Texas has been shown to be pretty faulty. We don't really know what the real picture is with coronavirus. We have the hospitalization counts, and we know the counts of people who have died with coronavirus, and that's a couple of metrics we can look at, but a fuller picture creates, as the New York Times reported, more of a distrust of Texas government than you might have otherwise expected from folks who do typically insist on a lot of transparency. Governor Abbott has often touted that his administration would be the most transparent administration ever. It doesn't seem to be that way.
No, I don't see any transparency. All right. Well, one thing, I don't think this was kind of on the list, but I think it's MJ Hager and Cornyn are going to have a debate coming up. I guess, is it next week? And
they do.
One question I was going to ask, though, is Cornyn, in my opinion, doesn't seem that he would need a debate. Are there new numbers coming out that maybe Cornyn might need to get out and debate MJ Hager?
I would say a couple things about that. One, you're right that usually the incumbent who is in no danger of having a loss coming their way, and I think the debate is it's not next week. It's October 9th. I was just looking.
Oh, okay.
I will make sure I got it right.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah, it's a couple of weeks away, but want to make sure I had it right for people. Look, the incumbent who's in a comfortable position, does not need to have a debate. Usually it's the challenger and whoever is behind who needs to have a debate. Anytime historically when you look at a race and there's one candidate who is sort of demanding and pounding the table and saying, why won't they debate me? That's usually the person who's losing, right? Almost always. However, I would say that to temper that, John Cornyn is more of an old-school politician. He is somebody who comes from the old guard of the Republican Party, and I think that it's just in his mind probably traditional that they would at least have one debate. It's probably a situation where as long as he just doesn't mess up, then it's fine. I think that it's it's a real opportunity for Hager to get in there and get herself known, as we might have talked about a little bit last week. You remember that ad that she was running, which is sort of a visually stunning ad where she's sitting on a hillside and there's a helicopter burning in the background. It's supposed to be showing folks what it looked like when she was in Afghanistan and earning a Purple Heart when she was, as a major in the military, was strapped to the bottom of a helicopter returning fire on the Taliban. Pretty heroic story, actually, of her life story. But to be running television ads that tell the life story of a candidate, that means that candidate is still in the mode of introducing themselves to people. That means people, they must have a poll, Matt, the Hager campaign, they must have a poll that shows that people haven't heard that story. That's why they would be spending money on that ad. And so that means that, some of these polls that we've seen where, Hager and Cornyn are only separated by, 4 or 5 points, Cornyn is not as well known as someone like Ted Cruz, for example, who does have a big national profile. Cornyn's more low-key, and that's kind of troubling for an incumbent
can both
who has
help
been in
and hurt
office
him,
for
I guess.
so long. Say that again?
I said that could both help and hurt him, especially if you look at the last election where people came out against Ted Cruz, and he had a harder time with that.
Right.
Of course, Beto O'Rourke was better known than MJ Hager.
But way better known. I mean, the dynamics of this race are just nothing like that one, right?
Yeah.
You have an incumbent who's not sort of a lightning rod the way Cruz was, and you don't exactly have a full-on rock star in MJ Hager, at least not just yet.
Yeah. All right, well, one other thing I wanted to get into real fast because we're running out of time, but I think Donald Trump and the Republicans were saying that they were going to have over 1 million people on the ground knocking on doors, whereas on the other hand, the Democrats said they had 0. And you've kind of talked, you sent me an email that kind of talked that we're seeing that in Texas now, even at the lower level, that the GOP's getting out and have boots on the ground. Democrats not so much.
They have boots on the ground, just in different ways. So the
more phone calls and less.
Yeah, it's
knocking.
Interesting. In local races like Texas House races, and especially in places like the Houston area and Dallas-Fort Worth, you do have Republicans just hitting the ground and knocking doors and talking to voters the way they normally would. The only thing that's different is they're wearing a mask and trying to be respectful and keep at a distance when they're having their conversations. But from the Democratic side, they are taking the position that voters don't want to see that some people are very nervous about coronavirus anyway, that, when a lot of people get groceries delivered, for example, they don't actually want to have any contact with the person who dropped off the groceries, and so they're taking the position that they don't want to have contact with people who are talking about politics. It's an interesting question of who has more downside risk. Is it Republicans who could offend people by showing up in person on their doorsteps, or is it the Democrats who might minimize their voter contact by avoiding door knocking? We've got a full report on that at quorumreport.com.
All right. Well, we want to thank you, Scott Braddock, for coming on, editor of the Quorum Report. Very interesting as always. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
All right. You have a good day and a great weekend. We'll be right back on News Talk 95.1 FM, 790 AM KFYO.